Try to remember your third birthday. The cake, the candles, the voices singing slightly off-key because they loved you and didn't care how it sounded. Most people reach for that memory and come back with nothing solid. What you call your earliest memory is probably not from age 3 at all. It's from 4, maybe 5. Reconstructed and re-edited so many times it barely resembles what actually happened in that room. You probably assume those years vanished because you were too young to notice them. But the real answer is far stranger than simple forgetting. You noticed everything. You just weren't built yet to keep it. In 1905, Sigmund Freud gave this strange blank patch a name: infantile amnesia. He'd noticed something odd across his patients. Adults could narrate entire decades of their lives in vivid detail, yet the first 3 or 4 years sat almost completely empty. Not blurry. Empty. Freud guessed it was psychological. Some kind of repression hiding things too disturbing for a child's mind to carry forward. He was wrong about the mechanism. But he was right that something deliberate was happening. What exactly? It took nearly a century of neuroscience to even start answering that properly. Here's the part that should unsettle you a little. Your brain at 2 years old wasn't broken. It wasn't too primitive to form memories. A 2-year-old can find a toy hidden 3 weeks earlier. A 2-year-old recognizes faces, predicts routines, throws an entire tantrum over the wrong shade of plastic cup. That's memory in action, happening in real time. So if toddlers can clearly remember things moment to moment, why does almost none of it survive into adulthood? The answer starts in a small, curved structure shaped like a seahorse. The hippocampus. It's the part of your brain responsible for stitching individual moments into memories you can retrieve later. What scientists call episodic memory. In an infant's brain, that structure isn't finished. It's still under construction, still adding new cells at a pace it will never reach again, and that construction site is exactly where memory starts falling apart. In 2014, neuroscientists Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn at the University of Toronto ran an experiment that reframed the entire problem. They were studying neurogenesis, the birth of brand new neurons, inside the hippocampus of young mice. Infant mice generate new hippocampal neurons at a dramatically higher rate than adult mice ever do. When the researchers artificially boosted neurogenesis in adult mice, those adults started forgetting recently learned information almost as fast as infants. When they slowed neurogenesis down in infant mice, the infants held on to memories for far longer than expected. Read that again. The very thing that makes an infant's brain so explosively adaptable, so capable of absorbing an entire language and 1,000 new skills in a single year, might be the exact same thing erasing its own memories as it goes. Picture the hippocampus as a city under permanent construction. New buildings going up daily. Roads rerouted overnight to make space for them. If you tried to file a map of that city from last Tuesday, it would already be obsolete by Thursday. Your 2-year-old brain wasn't failing to save memories. It was growing so fast, it kept demolishing the very streets those memories had been filed under. This isn't unique to humans either. Researchers have found similar memory blackouts in young rats, young mice, and even some birds. The species change. The construction problem doesn't. Wherever a brain has to build itself at top speed, old memories seem to be the price it pays for new capacity. But neurogenesis is only half the story. The rest is even stranger. Psychologist Patricia Bauer at Emory University has spent decades studying how autobiographical memory about yourself as a continuous character moving through time, actually comes online. Her research points to something counterintuitive. Very young children don't just lack the storage space to keep memories, they lack a framework sturdy enough to organize them into something a future version of themselves could ever retrieve, A memory needs a you to hang on to. Without a stable sense of self, a memory has nowhere to attach, no shelf to sit on, no name written on the box. You've probably seen the classic experiment, even if you didn't know its name. A toddler sees a sticker placed on their forehead in a mirror. Below a certain age, they reach for the mirror. Above it, they reach for their own face. Somewhere around 18 months to 2 years, a child crosses that line and starts treating the reflection as themselves rather than as a stranger. Psychologist Gordon Gallup formalized this exact test back in the 1970s. Touching the sticker instead of the mirror became the marker scientists still use today, not just to track self-recognition switching on in human toddlers, but in chimpanzees, dolphins, and even magpies. Around that same window, language detonates. And language doesn't just describe an experience after the fact. Researchers Catherine Nelson and Robin Faivush argued that language actively constructs memory, giving raw sensation a shape it never had on its own. A beginning, a middle, an end, a this happened, then that happened structure that a wordless brain simply cannot build on its own. Without language, an experience is a flood. A smell, a flash of fear, a burst of delight. With language, that flood becomes a story, and stories are what survive. This is where psychologist Carol Peterson's research gets unsettling in its own quiet way. She tracked children over years, asking them to describe their earliest memory, then returning later and asking again. The memories didn't just fade at the edges. They changed entirely. Children confidently reported different earliest memories at different ages, sometimes swapping one out for another completely unrelated event, convinced each time that they were recalling the original. Your earliest memory isn't a fixed photograph sitting untouched in a drawer somewhere in your skull. It's being quietly rebuilt every single time you reach for it. Which means the version of you that's always existed, the one you assume has been quietly continuous since birth, is less a recording than a story being retold by a slightly different narrator every year. You're not lying when you describe who you've always been. You're just describing the latest draft. So why does the blackout end instead of continuing forever? Because by age 3 or 4, the hippocampus has matured enough to slow its frantic construction schedule. A sense of self has solidified enough to give new experiences something to attach to. And language has developed enough to turn raw sensation into something tellable, something that can survive being repeated. Here's the twist: most people never connect back to their own life. The years you can't remember were not wasted years. They were the years your brain spent building the exact machinery required to remember anything at all. You couldn't keep those early memories because you were still constructing the filing system that would eventually hold every memory you do have. The blank years aren't a gap in the building. They're the foundation underneath it, the part you're standing on without ever being able to see down into it. And this isn't a modern glitch unique to you. Every human being who has ever lived has crossed through this exact same blank patch at the start of their life. Hunter-gatherers crouched by a fire 10,000 years ago went through it. Pharaohs went through it. Your grandparents went through it. You went through it. It isn't a flaw bolted onto an otherwise perfect memory system. It's wired into the species, possibly because a brain that's still learning to walk, talk, and recognize danger doesn't need a stable archive of yesterday nearly as much as it needs to keep growing as fast as biologically possible. A toddler's hippocampus isn't being lazy, it's triaging, learning to balance on 2 legs, decoding an entire language from scratch, and recognizing which faces mean safety and which mean danger all take priority over filing away a single afternoon for later retrieval. Evolution built a brain that spends its first years optimizing for survival skills, not for nostalgia. The forgetting doesn't fully stop once childhood ends, either. Adult hippocampal neurogenesis runs at a fraction of an infant's pace, but it never reaches zero. Somewhere in your brain, right now, a small number of brand new neurons are being born, quietly reshuffling old circuits you assumed were permanent. Think about how the adults around a toddler shape this process without ever realizing it. When a parent narrates a child's day back to them, remember when we saw the dog at the park, and you laughed so hard you fell over? They aren't just making small talk. They're handing the child a structure sturdy enough to store that moment inside. Children whose parents talk through shared experiences in rich detail tend to develop earlier, more elaborate memories than children whose parents don't. The story doesn't just describe the memory after the fact. In a very real sense, the story helps build the memory in the first place. Now look at how you document your own life today. Every photo, every caption, every story repeated at dinner with friends is doing exactly what a parent once did for you as a toddler. You are still narrating your way into permanence, still constructing filing systems for moments that would otherwise dissolve the instant they happened. The only difference is that you're old enough now to do it for yourself, constantly. Usually without ever noticing you're doing it at all. Your phone now resurfaces a photo from exactly a year ago and tags it on this day, as if it has quietly become an external hippocampus, one that never demolishes its own filing system the way your toddler brain once did. You scroll past it for half a second and feel something close to recognition. A small flicker for a moment you would otherwise have lost completely. It's the same flicker a bedtime story once gave you, back before you could write your own. So the next time you try to remember your third birthday and come back with nothing, you're not looking at a failure. You're looking at proof of construction. Proof that your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do, tearing down scaffolding the moment something sturdier had been built in its place. No alarm went off. No data was corrupted. The system simply moved on, the way it was designed to. Try to remember your third birthday. You still can't. But now you know why. Not because nothing happened in that room, but because everything happening in your skull that day was too busy building the mind that would, decades later, go looking for it.